Hello, everyone. My name is Gregory Khan, and today I have with me Sorawit Songsataya, one of my favorite people, one of my favorite artists. And how are you doing today, Sorawit?
I'm good. I just
Welcome.
woke up and I'm at my mom's in Thailand. So yeah, pretty relaxed. I'm kind of at the end of my holiday, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how long have you been away now?
Um, I left New Zealand as soon as I finished the Hokkien show, so that's March 20th. So 2.5 months.
Must be good
Yeah,
to have a little bit of a break and some distance from, that
yeah.
show.
Actually, no, you're right, because I just watched one of my videos that I made for the show like 2 nights ago, and it kind of blew me away.
Okay,
Sorry to say
save the
that about
thought.
my
Save the
own
thought.
work.
We're gonna talk about that show, but I think to warm us up and to warm everyone else up, I like to ask this, which is how did you get into making stuff? Whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it art or not, like doesn't really matter to me. But how did you,
Making
yeah.
stuff. Um, I mean, as far as I can remember, I've always been good at drawings. So like since I can remember, people will be like, "Wow, you can draw." Um, and I've always been that like arty kid in the room, like at school. Um, so I can always draw really well, like I can draw realistically. Um, so that's always almost like always been my trajectory. Like I always knew that somehow I will end up doing something creative. Um, but I didn't grow up in a family where, you know, my dad's a musician, my mom's a theater teacher or something like that. Like I had none of
Totally.
that. So I didn't know what fine arts mean or is until I got to the university. But yeah, how I got into making it's always because I've always been like highly creative and yeah, so when you are a creative person, you just find things to, and I guess I would say one other thing is that I'm not good with language. So I'm always struggling with like trying to communicate with words. Um, so I found this output that is non-verbal or non-written. It's like very, very free and very expansive. Um, and 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 I like the fact that it doesn't communicate directly as the way that words sometimes do. Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, in some ways, I think it's almost like the inverse of what I was like growing up, where I was terrible at drawing stuff, or like I only drew really like stupid boy stuff, like draw battleships with lots of weapons on it, or like quite silly things. And then I think for me, my my crutch was language, and I think
Mm,
also being moving to New Zealand, right, and being an immigrant,
mm,
like I kind of leaned on it even more heavily because that's such an easy if you have the language, like to be able to interface with a new place and new people, it just, makes it so much
mm.
easier. So no, really cool. I love hearing like, yeah, those kinds of like
At
stories
what
about.
age you moved to New Zealand? Sorry, I thought you were born in New Zealand, but
No, I moved to New Zealand when I was 14.
oh my God, yeah, same.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
well, I think maybe I was 13. It's around like
Yeah. Yeah,
kind of
same.
yeah, bad teenage years.
A really hard time to move, for sure.
Yeah, not a good idea because yeah, you around the age where you like setting up your own kind of social circle,
Yeah.
trusted friends, and to not yeah, to have that kind of foundation being, well, to me, it was quite shaky. So not recommend.
Yeah, it was definitely a scary and stressful and challenging time. And I think again, I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's at least one of the reasons why like I leaned into language, into
Mm,
English, a lot just to like help me, cope.
mm, mm.
It's interesting the different ways that we cope with those kinds of things.
Yeah.
No, that's super cool. Yeah, thank you for telling us about that. So yeah, we can talk about some of your more recent work, and then we in a weird way we're gonna like jump back and forth. We're gonna start with like your show at the Hocken,
Yeah.
in Dunedin, and we can move back afterwards to talk about some of your earlier work and how you might see your process practice evolving. But yeah, tell us a bit about the Hocken work.
Ooh. Um, or the Hawkins. Yeah, where do I start? Also, I'm like my brain is on like holiday mode. So
I can help. Maybe in terms of process, and I think I was saying this to you before we started recording, like there's the kind of process of conceptualizing or like the emerging of the initial ideas or the initial conditions for the show or the work in the show. And then there's the actual kind of like execution and the material like assemblage and all that. How did the ideas, or at least the conditions for the ideas, come about for you for this show?
it came from previous bodies of work. So when I started the fellowship, I knew that I want to explore, continue on a certain thread from previous body of works because I mean in the past 10 years I tend to kind of like jump from one project to another. Um, but I always kind of see this continuing thread. Not in terms of physical forms, but more like, yeah, continuing ideas. But with the fellowship, when I started, I specifically want to really build a connection and a relationship with the material, and this material being limestone, like or Maru limestone. And before I started before I started the fellowship, I already work on the material, like working with limestone for 3 years already. Like it started kind of early 2019. Um, and so because the fellowship is based in Otepoti, Dunedin, like the South Island, it's like this ideal setting of, understanding the wider family or ecology of the stones. So that was like the number one of, yeah, the main
Mm,
ideas.
mm.
And you said how to move from that and then execute it through materials
Maybe
and form.
before I guess you could dive into the execution. I guess I have two questions for you. One maybe would be what were the conditions of the fellowship like? Like how much time did you get? Like what kinds of resources and allowances did you have?
It's a year fellowship, so like exactly 12 months. And I got paid throughout, like the equivalent of the
Amazing.
salary that I got was the same as a lecturer, university lecturer.
That's so
So
cool.
technically, I was an employee of Otago University for a year, um,
That's
and
amazing.
really loved being looked after and as part of a larger, um, because I've never been fully employed, like, you know, um, so yeah, it felt secure to be like have all these things that normal working people get, like yeah, sick leave or whatever salary. Well, no, we didn't get sick leave, but you know what I mean. Like, yeah, all the benefits that come with being employed full time.
Yeah.
And it came with the studio space. But I had to find my own residential place. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. And I think it's important for people to hear about that because those the environment that you're working in is obviously really important. And like you said, it's rare to get that kind of time, money, permission. What do you think those conditions, what kind of effect do you think those conditions had on the work, like having that kind of space to move
Oh
in?
my God, like so much. Like I wouldn't be able to, especially, you know, one of the video is sort of focused on in the fellowship exhibition. One of the video is focusing on these like rock outcrops in Central Otago, both like limestone and schist, which is a type of rock, a different kind of rock. But just to kind of understand the terrain and the geographic locations of where things are, the history of place, like you can't, well, I wouldn't be able to do it while trying to manage or like negotiate between three different part-time jobs. Like I used to have three different part-time jobs and plus studio, but because of the fellowship, I could afford to, got in my car and drove to Central Otago and stay for a week in the middle of nowhere and not
So
having to
rad.
worry about who's paying my rent.
Yeah.
So things like that. And like also didn't have to worry about like, oh my God, it's gonna be Friday. I have to rush back to my job, my part-time job, like things like that. Or I have to get up at 6 because this job gonna start. So it was a real luxury and privilege to just have that kind of worry-free condition. It's almost like you live with the work that you're making.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
What a
I would
dream.
do it again.
What a dream. Okay, and then the next question I had is actually more about the materials that you're working with. And like you said, you have had a history of working with limestone
Mm,
before this. And one thing I find really interesting, of course, as a writer, is that like as an artist working with actual materials, um, these materials themselves are very rich, like they're very rich histories. And I
mm,
think it may not be very obvious to I don't know, like outsiders, I don't know if that's the right term, but
yeah, yeah.
that material histories have a lot to do with our human histories, and that they're actually like not really easily distinguishable, right? And
No, yeah.
what in limestone was like fascinating to you, or what got you like into limestone?
It started with this project in 2019 that I made like this. I created this installation for the outdoor terrace at the Auckland Art Gallery. Um, I can show you a photo of the work.
I remember this work.
Um, Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh yeah, one sec. I got you. Here. No, not there. Here, share screen, multiple participants. Okay, try it now.
Oh my gosh. Okay. The sharing?
Mm-hmm.
Does it
Yep,
ask
looks
me to
good.
like change system setting or whatever?
You did
Um,
that good. You did that really quickly. Nice job.
so is my face also appearing?
I think so. I'm not entirely sure what Zoom does with the recording, but I think we're on the side. I
Okay,
think.
whatever.
It doesn't
Um,
matter.
so this is the first work that was made with Oamaru limestone. Um, and with this installation, there's a range of different, hold on, sorry.
Take your time. It's all good. We've got all the time in the world. Well, not really. You have to go somewhere, but relatively.
But yeah, so it started with it's this insulation which has other materials as well, like fiberglass and whatnot. But initially the idea for this work, I was kind of fascinated by, or not fascinated, but curious about how to approach the concept of death in a not so morbid way, but trying to view death as a mechanism, like cyclical mechanism.
Transformative, right?
Yeah, transformative, and as part of everything else. So initially I actually wanted the large molar to be made out of glass, but that's gonna cost like insane. But so we end up with fiberglass, and then some are actually like this swan is based on an extinct species of giant swan in the South Island. I think the Maori name is Poa. And yeah, so this idea of how to approach like different ways of thinking about death is or like trying to imagine death as not being this kind of final thing or like permanent, forever vanish. But so I kind of thought of stone, or like this myth, like this Greek mythology of, you know, the Medusa of, you know, you look, this is a bit off the terrain, off topic, but I like the story of how you looked into the eyes of Medusa and you turned to stone, only temporarily. But then, yeah, with limestone. So the other idea I kind of had with the work is that they actually just sleeping. Like all these birds, they're just sleeping or being frozen. So this ideas of working with stone kind of fit in these lines of thoughts around
I can see, especially when you're talking about death, transformation, and finitude, right? Like I think stone is such an interesting material because symbolically, of course, like it stands for permanence for a lot of people. It stands for stability, permanence, persistence through time. But when on certain scales that starts to fall apart because stone, like any other object, is finite and has limits.
And even limestone itself, I kind of fascinated by the fact that they're made from like shells, like skeletal shells of
that is organic. It has organic so-called components, right?
Yeah. So the majority of it are made from like these like skeletal fragments of like tiny marine organisms similar to plankton, like planktonic. They call forams. Well, foraminifera, but forams is the short term. And they are, if I remember correctly, they're this type of algae that exists in the ocean and actually produce more than 60%. I might not be correct on this, on the exact number, but more than 60% of overall oxygen in the world. So when they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, and over millions of years, the compression or pressure from on the seafloor kind of build up and become the stone. So I also like this transformation in the material itself, from like this lively being becoming, you know, things that were once in the ocean becoming this concrete. Sometimes I walk into like old buildings. Like when I was in Oamaru, there's a lot of old like limestone colonial buildings, and I walk into an old bank building, and it's you don't usually think about it, but like you're kind of surrounded by the ocean or like concrete ocean. And I found that
And the deep past as well, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but with this work, I didn't carve it myself. So when I started off, I kind of got in touch with a local carver. This artist, his name is Brett Kino, and he's based in the Upper Hutt in Wellington. So we worked together. I kind of sent him my 3D models that I made on computers, which look very similar to the final outcome here.
Yeah.
And I would drove like from Wellington. I was living in Wellington at the time. I would drove all the way up to Upper Hutt. I think he lives in this area called Avalon. Just like so, yeah. Um, and like visit his studio every what twice every month or 3 times a month, quite regularly. And he has his studio in this like converted garage. Um, and yeah, so that's how I started off, and just to see his studio and all the equipment and the process of how he transformed like a a block of stone into this kind of soft organic forms as like drove me insane. I'm like, I want to work. I want to. I want to learn more, and yeah.
I think that's so cool. I mean, it does remind you that or not you, but us, that like the line between organic and inorganic is actually very blurry.
Mm.
What's mineral and what's biological, like there's a lot of overlap. So no, it's fascinating. Also, thank you, by the way, for talking to us about this show, because I know we didn't prepare to, but I thought that it gives quite good background for what you end up doing at the Hocken. So sorry, there's a bit of a tangent, but we can come back to the Hocken show. Um,
Yeah, so with the Hawkins show, there's several components, but I could maybe try to simplify into 3 components in the
sure.
show. When you walk into the space, the central gallery, you see a body of limestone sculptures. And then on the left side of the gallery is a room with a video work focusing on rock outcrops in central Otago. And on the right side is another video work which focused on the kotuku or the white heron. And they nest on the west coast of the South Island. So all the subjects are very kind of South Island inspired and
Yeah.
focused. And I kind of like all the elements in the show, I already kind of began working before the fellowship started.
Got it.
Um, and maybe I'll start showing photos.
Yeah, I love that.
Um,
And then once you got the photos up, then we can also talk about like, yeah, again, I think you were about to tell us about the like actual material, the execution.
mhm. So I'm going
Which,
to
by the
show.
way, yeah, yeah. Well, you're finding that, like, I'll just say as well that, I've only done one of these interviews before this, and that's with Essa, who's a poet. And I love this because there's so much overlap, of course, in like how
Mm,
ideas come about and process, but it's also so different, you know. Someone working
yeah,
with material ultimately is still so different from writing. So
yeah.
great.
But I mean, this work, the show with the Hocken has an overlap with language a little bit.
Mm,
Because with the fellowship, the other skill that I started developing is like making sound. Um,
mm.
I don't want to call it music, but um, um, I'm not gonna show the proper installation, like in documentation taken by the gallery photographer,
Fair
because
enough.
I'm just gonna show the ones that I took myself, and
Yeah, no problem. Whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah.
they're not very professional, like they're a bit yellow, but whatever.
Hey, we're kind of behind the scenes anyway. So
Um, so
also, as you know, this is not the most professional interview ever, so we're good.
so it's hard to, but yeah, this is kind of the
Wow.
central gallery when you walk in.
Yeah.
Right, I'm just gonna let this plane pass.
Okay, that's cool. We can't hear it, but that's, yeah, you just wait a bit. I can probably do a little bit of editing and cut some of these transitions out. So it's cool.
So yeah, the central gallery space has this groups of limestone sculptures, which kind of these kind of pillars forms are based on this image that I found. Hold on. This
Wow.
image was like old temple in
amazing.
Songsataya, which was like Thailand first capital city. But these are not made from limestone, they're made from laterites, which is different types of mineral. Laterite is interesting because geologists still arguing whether it's rock or soil. It's really kind of not either, because laterite is like this sort of washed out sediments after floods, like from rivers, and there's all these like rich nutrients that it's kind of like silt. But it's older than that. I mean, the process of occurring is not like silt. But what it's got hardened, so like you dig it up and it's got hardened once it's explored to air. But once it's in the ground, it's like soft, like just like soil. It's interesting, and you can't really like this darker bit here. That's laterite. It's actually deep red, like deep dark brown red, kind of like burgundy. No, like kind of. Oh yeah, deep red. And then with these like temple structures, they cover the laterite with stucco or like plaster.
Yeah.
And these structures are like beams for I'm not sure whether they finished building this or it got destroyed
unfinished.
after.
Right.
Maybe it got destroyed after the war. There's like constant war with either Myanmar or Cambodia, like when but yeah, it's sort of informed the main sculptures in the Hawkins show, because I mean I sort of use limestone as a material from New Zealand, right? Just like physically related to New Zealand. But the shapes and the forms sort of referencing Thai architectural elements. So there's this ideas of connecting with the notion of home, or like the proximity to what home is.
And also kind of like almost the constructedness as well to a degree, that you also kind of have to piece home together from these disparate places and elements.
Yeah. And I carved into the stone to hold on, let's just trying and close up.
I'll say as well while you're looking for this that they're
Hmm.
such beautiful objects, and like they also still speak to me about that tension between stability, permanence, and fragility, right? Because stone pillars again are meant to like last, you know, they're foundational, they they're meant to persist through time. And the way that you've constructed yours is is also somewhat with a fragility in mind, right? They're not like a single kind of like monolithic piece. They're made of these smaller bits as well.
Yeah, yeah. So they actually just like loosely stacking on
Yeah,
top of each other. There's no like kind of locking mechanism or anything.
yeah.
Um, and I like this idea that they can be reconfigured,
They're
erect.
modular.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, in the kind of um the texture of the stone I carve. So these are actually machine carved, like using high pressure water jet. So like
Mhm.
they kind of carved by water. Um, and they're based on the 3D models that I made on computer. And so I'll just quickly show you the 3D model as well, because with this show I kind of plan everything on computer first. Um, where the hell is it? Oh gosh.
You're so organized, by the way. Just saying. Look at this file system.
Fucking gallery. Yeah, I have to uh, order it by number, otherwise so I did everything on computer first, mainly because I like working with stone. It's so many other logistics involved, like the weight of it is you have to organize like trucks and whatnot. And I don't want to create waste.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, oh my God, this is the wrong file, but whatever. This is like an earlier version of how
Wow.
how I envision it.
This is a side point as well. Am I right in thinking that this show is one of the shows where you actually don't foreground tech as much as some of your other shows? I mean, the tech is obviously part of the process, but in some of your other works, tech is also being kind of like scrutinized. Um,
Which nice. What? No, this is heavily.
okay.
You mean like digital technology stuff?
Yeah,
Like digital process? Yeah, no, the with the videos is
of
like
course.
heavily
Yeah.
uh
Okay. Okay.
oh,
Cool.
there's like 3D animation and stuff. But so this is like an earlier plan. Um, so I have to be quite exact with the size of the stone. So I model them and share them with the staff at the quarry. Um, yeah, as I say, because I don't want to create waste. So not some, but I think all of the final sculptures presented in the exhibitions they are offcuts from existing blocks of stones that
Oh, wow. Okay.
people have made order and probably didn't pay for them and didn't pick them up. So they were sitting at the quarry for I don't know how long, but yeah, they are kind of like recycle. Well, yeah,
Wow.
off cuts. So I'm trying to being cautious and conscious about environmental and also working with stone, which I will go into later, but the kind of geopolitics of it and the cultural sensitivity around it is another major um considerations and development that happen throughout the fellowship.
Mm.
But I wanted to show this model because as you can see with the 3D version, you see these I still don't know what to call them, like pattern. No, they're not pattern. Um,
They're kind of like, you mean you're talking about the grooves that
yeah, like the negative space. Um,
mm, mm, mm.
the negative spaces that I later filled with beeswax.
Mm, mm,
Uh,
mm. Because I wrote, I mean, this is a different show, but you know, I also encountered your stone beeswax works in another show.
yeah. So some I fill with beeswax and then some fill with resin. So like
Mm.
this. And with the like inside the beeswax, there's these different materials like dry plants and shells and um
I just love all these different riffs on time, archive, transformation,
mm,
memory, traces. Love it.
yeah. Well, I'm glad that it came like show through. Because like when sometimes you work, I spent maybe more than 6 months or a year like developing this alone in studio. So yeah, sometimes you're too close with the work, right? Um,
Yeah, and you know, I'll say this as well. Like for me, you know, you can have as rich a process or compositional set of ideas as you like, but whether it comes through is almost not up to you after a while, right? It's kind of like it does its own thing, and you're like, okay, well, that I tried.
yeah, tried. Um, so yeah, there's like dry plants that I sort of gather throughout the year. These are not like
Mm,
things that I went out and like collect purposefully for the show. It's stuff that I collect throughout the years, like um behind the studio, um at the university, there's like this massive coffee tree and they, it flowered so much. So there's these ones that like fall into the ground that I kind of like collect, and you can see some of them here. There's some plant fiber from, I don't know if you can see
mm.
this sort of like line,
Yeah,
like this thread.
yeah,
It's
totally.
actually, I think those are Tikoka uh
Mm,
fiber from like Tikoka leaf, which I I made from this workshop. There's one another that Louis, another artist based in Wellington, Otaki, sorry, Louis Stockneil invited me to participate. So yeah, there's materials that I collect throughout the year that sort of add to this, as you mentioned, these ideas of archive, histories,
mm.
memory. So they really play along with how stones, the material itself is, as this recording material.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
just
then
love I guess sorry to interrupt. I just love the juxtaposition of so many different obviously so many different materials, but also so many different types of strength and fragility.
mm,
Um, you know, examples of both simultaneously like resilience and fragility, like at the same time. You know, it's just
yeah.
mm.
Oh, thank you. That's yeah, a really nice compliment. Well, not compliment, critical feedback.
both,
Um,
both. Sorry, I
yeah.
interrupted you.
So, and some of these, so there's these kind of what I see as speakers, so like the shape of speakers as well.
Yeah,
Mm. And then there's these like kind of bowl shape or the internal part of the speakers, like the
yeah. The cone.
circular
I
thing.
don't know what you. Yeah. I don't know. I
Bad
don't know.
research. But they more like in Thailand we have this like lotus like basin,
Mm,
usually around like entrance of a house,
I
a
see.
house. Or sometimes in the old days you would have this like water, like this kind of terracotta bowl to wash your feet before you walk up the house. So this form is kind of loosely based on that
Mhm.
particular cultural object. And then another large speakers, and yeah, I kind of drawn to these forms of the speakers because I produce sound for the videos. So when you walk into the space in this central room, it's sort of um bracket by two video
Mm,
rooms. And then the sound components that I made from both videos sort of bleed into the middle, like the central space. Um, and I like this idea that the stone sing back or talk back
mm,
at you
yeah.
because that's another kind of experience that I learned from spending a lot of time in Central Otago, is that the place like Central Otago really operates in a different, well, to me, how I experience the places. It holds they hold their own energy, or yeah, it's a highly spiritual place. And
Mm,
every time I'm out there, it's almost like um the land or the stones, the place, like trying to communicate or talk. And it's almost like this lively conversations, um which didn't really require words. And that's like something that I really enjoy being out there, is that I felt there's like different ways of communicating with each other, um with with yeah, for lack of the better term, like non-human. I don't want
no, yeah,
I hate that non-human.
I get it.
Um
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean the place itself has, not not only history in geological factor, but also in social and cultural too. Because there's like this complex pathways from different um tribes, different iwi,
Mm,
um especially from how the East Coast would travel inland, because there was like these kind of complex rivers and lake systems.
mhm.
um so yeah, there are histories of like a kai, or food gathering place or meeting points. So yeah, there's all, and I read somewhere that some of our main like highways that go through Central Otago or even along the coast, those are actually based on all traveling routes
Mm.
by Manafenua. So yeah, there's it's there's a lot to learn. And yeah, maybe I'll let you ask questions if I can.
I think that for me, like, and I, at the risk of repeating myself, perhaps, like, what I love about your process, and I think it's true of the work as well, is that there's the sense of like deep curiosity, deep time, deep fragility, and also but also this very kind of like gentle kind of communion with these ideas and these materials.
Mm.
Um, and just I think again as a writer, right? Like I get a bit jealous, like there's so many so many beautiful meanings and codes and relationships and history is just kind of like stacked into these like dense objects that you then get to kind of like have interact with each other in this space.
Mm.
I'm just like, how do I do that in writing? I don't know. Try, but
Yeah.
it's so magical. And I just think that for me, when I look at the work as well, I think that it's a very nice balance of like the outputs are of course beautiful, but they also gesture towards the process really nicely without like it being too imbalanced either way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, sorry, this is more like this is more just like my kind of sentimental, like
No,
emotional
no,
feedback.
no,
But
please.
yeah, no, it's well, at this point, maybe what would be cool is if just being aware of the time as well,
Mm.
keeping this Hocken fellowship and show in mind, but also like looking backwards at earlier stuff. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to look at like, first of all, what your earlier work was like, maybe in as detailed or as kind of zoomed out as you want, and then how some of your approaches may have evolved, or
Mm.
what's remained continuous and what new things have happened in the evolution of like your practice, your process.
Yeah.
It's a hard question, so yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I still employ like digital animation and like 3D modeling process throughout. Like, um, I think
Maybe, yeah,
when,
speak a little bit to that because we didn't get to talk about the animation that you did for the Hocken show. So, like, what kind of role does the 3D animation tend to play, do you think,
mm,
in the work
well, technology.
or
Um,
technology in general? Yeah.
oh, it's everywhere from like conceptualization of ideas into the process of making into like presentation. So, um, I mean, I started off like when I was doing my postgraduate, like my MFA, I taught myself how to do 3D modeling, and like how to work with like different software, video like post-production video, like software editing, as well as 3D modeling software and 3D animation software. So because because I wanted to make moving image that is in a way free from all the constraints of filming in real life.
Yeah.
So there's pros and cons, but
Mm.
some of the pros are, for example, like I don't need an expensive camera. Like I can just use the
Mm.
software camera,
Yeah.
and there's all these philosophical idea behind the process of, like the camera is there, but it's not like you actually just
Yeah.
navigating in like computational process.
Mm.
Um, and then yes, so there's things like that of doing things with the software, like you don't have to deal with the weather.
Yeah.
Or I started making, let's just say, I'll just show some of the earlier work.
Because a side point that I will make here is that, we started this conversation with you talking about how good you were at drawing. And I guess in some sense, this rendering is like an extension, you're just like
Oh,
taking that
yeah,
as even further.
yeah, for sure. So this is
Oh yes, some of these are familiar to me, I think.
some of these like 3D characters that based on like
Yes.
the like classic kind of vase shape or
Mhm.
container. Um, and I started with these kind of vase sort of forms because, well, first of all, they are easy. Um, and basically it was how I learned how to do 3D modeling. So there's different methods of how to create certain contour or yeah, different. So I didn't kind of intend to create these characters. Like I didn't have a narrative for them. I was they were part of my learning process of like how
Mm, yeah.
to do model 3D modeling. And yes, a lot, I would say a lot of my outcomes or like final execution sometimes was actually where I started off. If that makes sense. Like sometimes I would do like an ink drawing or something just to let out ideas. Like during
Mm,
lockdown, like during lockdowns, I did like these. Taught myself how to use this like digital watercolor software, and I would just do randoms like digital ink drawings, and some of them end up in a final video work.
yeah.
So I actually don't spend a lot of time um editing or
Mm. Well,
refining.
it,
Sometimes
it
they're quite
actually
raw.
it actually reminds me of what you're saying about how you collect materials, or or I don't know,
Yeah,
materials is the right
yeah,
word, but and you're gathering things as you go, and not
yeah,
necessarily with an outcome in mind, and kind of letting the process dictate, what ends up happening a lot of the time.
yeah, yeah. I tend to, allow the ways of how I live my life on a day-to-day basis to kind of come through the work too. But yeah, these are earlier um 3D models, characters, and then again, I these are like I don't have I didn't I don't have like 10
I love
draft
it.
versions of these objects. They're basically what I play with, like yeah, what I play with, because I was just playing around on an iPad using this kind of uh this pottery app. um and then which you can like send your finished pottery to a company to be printed. And I printed a few. So these are like 2000
Oh my God,
or 14,
that's
13.
amazing.
Um, yeah, which is a process that I stopped, a method that I stopped because these are actually made from plastic powders, like really fine plastic powders, and I hate the idea that these will get washed off into the ocean.
Uh, yeah,
So
I see.
like,
Yeah.
like I don't want to participate in that. I mean, it's hard not to be. It's like artists creating garbage all the time, but yeah, that was like one of the main reason I stopped with 3D printing production because the material is can be quite toxic, and I mean I'm still using like resin, epoxy in today's work as well in my recent work. So, but I'm trying to be very environmentally conscious. Um,
I mean,
but
can I draw on one thing as well? Like, it's a more general point, but I think you've kind of hinted at it, which is that I'm guessing that when you're working on anything, it's rare for you to actually have specific outcomes as goals. Is that fair to say? You
yeah,
often let the process kind of like take you on a journey of like discovering.
yeah, I play a lot, and I think play is such a key thing. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm definitely not one who's like sitting in my studio thinking about how to be successful, like like the concept of success is never like I'm quite willing for any shows to fail. If they were going to fail, like why not? Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
um yeah, so almost all of the shows are like what I learned like
That's such a nice
recently.
way to look at it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I used to kind of, and I still do, I approach gallery spaces as a testing laboratory or learning space. I never think of them as this pristine space where I have to present something elegant.
Mm,
Yeah, I always like to
mm.
approach them as a testing space for new techniques, new ideas.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, I can very much relate to that. I think it's a very useful, like you say, like the idea is that it's not necessarily that it just ends up being the container for where you were at the time, in a way.
it's almost like studio time extended into the public realm,
Yes,
kind
yes,
of.
yes, 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 yes. And so in a way also that implies that you see your work as this like endless iteration, right? Endless evolution, transformation, iteration.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And because it's been this ongoing cycle has been going for 10 years now. So a lot of it to this point, if you mentioned something about evolution in process, is that these materials and process and subjects,
Mhm.
they become their own world, or
Yes,
they
absolutely.
become their own, what I call islands. They
Yeah.
become their own islands, like
I
connected
think that's
islands.
I think that's a great metaphor. Yeah, because the islands in the sense that like they they set their own terms and the works are meaningful relative to that particular context,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, or they are their own ecology, ecosystem.
Yes. Yeah, that's another
For
good term.
example, yeah, for example, I still see a connection of this 3D printed vase to limestone too. Like the texture is actually quite similar. Um, this when you touch this 3D printed object is really sandy, and it's very similar to limestone texture. And even when you like sand limestone down, like to a really fine, you can sand limestone down to like a really fine uh powder too. So it's yeah. And even the process of 3D modeling, it's still there. Like I showed you earlier of the 3D models of
Yeah.
these pillars, like it's
Yeah.
still there with similar to how I model some of the vast like characters.
Yeah.
Um, I was gonna say something that sort of linked to this to the videos. Mm, Shall I mention some of the videos from the Hawkins or
I reckon we have a little bit of time. Yeah, for you to mention it. Because I
oh
think it is an important, it's a pretty important component, the videos, right? So I think we should talk a bit about them if we can.
yeah, maybe I'll
Be
talk
greedy.
about one video. Yeah, what I was gonna link to a video before is this concept of islands. And one of the video I actually titled Unnamed Islands, which is a nod to my own how my work sustain their own
Mm.
energy, but also it's uh I think I first came across this the title Unnamed Island. I think it's part of a poem by Kerry. Um, yeah, I can't remember from which
I wish I could tell you as well. Don't know.
book. Hold on, I'm gonna turn on this. Oh, maybe I'll let the sound play for a little bit, just because this is also what I learned. And again, this is
Unfortunately, I don't know if the sound's coming through.
Oh, really? How do I do that? Audio
It's weird.
setting.
I feel like it should stream it, but it feels like it's only coming through your mic, if that's possible.
Live performance.
It's weird.
Ringtone.
I feel like that. Yeah, I don't know, unfortunately. Because I've never actually done streaming on Zoom, so I'm not entirely sure how it
Oh,
works.
can you hear that? Did you hear that?
Barely, barely. I think
Oh,
what's happening is that it's coming through your mic maybe, and then it's registering as like noise, so it's kind of being like filtered out potentially.
oh,
Mm.
okay. Maybe I'm using a free version. Original sound. Let me see.
Yeah, that's so
Never
weird. I don't get it.
mind.
Oh, I'm
Well,
sorry.
can't hear the
I'm not
sound,
sure
but
why.
um, what I was gonna say, the videos. Um, but yeah, this is. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So this is one of the videos in the Hawkins show, as a fellowship outcome.
Mm.
I wouldn't. I don't think I would. I don't think I have the energy to go into great depth of how I spent time with on the West Coast, filming the Kotuku, or like
Mm.
I mean, I can show you all the unedited footage from straight from my cameras, which I have about
Wow. Okay.
more than
Amazing.
200, but um, I would say that, yeah, the one of the key things from the fellowship and this Hokkien exhibition is not only about relationship and connection to the material, the stones, but also to place and the people that live there,
Yeah.
or like communities and history of people who live there. So with this work, one of the focus is the kotuku, which nest on the West Coast.
Mm.
And I've seen the birds in Thailand before, and I'm surprised that to see them to learn that they also live in New Zealand. And
Right.
actually,
Right.
the idea sort of started when I was developing that installation for the Auckland Art
Hmm.
Gallery outdoor tours with
Yes.
all the
Hmm.
native bird species, and then found out that the kotuku, or the white heron, is actually not endemic to New Zealand. Like they are quite
Mm.
common throughout Southeast Asia and in
Right.
Japan. Um, so they become this to me, uh, a link to Asia, or
Yeah.
um, uh, uh, symbols of relations.
Yeah. Yes.
Um,
Continuity, relations. Yeah.
yeah,
Flows.
also a, 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 a a way to understand a place too. Like I've never been to the West Coast before I developed this. I started, studying and researching their nesting site. Um, and actually, yeah, end up learning a lot about what what trees are around there in their nesting site, like what types of ecology that sustain the nesting site, but also what who live there in terms of which iwi, which hapu, um, who is the kaitiaki of this place and the history. Most of them are horrible and unfair, as we all know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the complexity of relationships between local private farmers, farm owners, and then yes, local iwi dock, um, and the evolution of what or the history of changes that happens. So,
Yeah.
for example, what was what is the what was the organization before doc, like what was it called, what other organizations involved in the history of trying to protect this nature reserve. There's like birds in forests, which I think still exists, and changing of hands of owners, and like all the complexity of who protect this place. So a lot of that, and like trying to think of ways to. So while I was learning a lot about histories, West Coast, Central Ontario, Limestone, or whatever, I'm also constantly think of way to how to reciprocate or give back. And sometimes, I was struggling with like, oh my God, what kind of skills or what can I offer back to community? And I thought of, things of like running art workshop or things like that. But then when this exhibition came out, which is still on at the Hocken, I kind of finally starting to understand that actually this is my offer. Like, yeah, this exhibition is literally what I give back. And unfortunately, maybe it's not in the form of money or physical things that can sustain communities in very practical ways, but it's a genuine offer. Well, yeah, I
Well,
guess, yeah.
it's like it's far from an insignificant thing. Like going back to something I said earlier, like for me, some of the power in your work is that I mean, we know that the term archive, but for me, these are really dense archives where you've chosen some traces that you've like distilled into these works, um,
Mm,
uh, and kind of taken all these threads and kind of like bundled them together and represented them, is another way of paying tribute, right, to these histories and these relationships and these various complex like environments. And because at the end of the day, there's no going back to being someone who's good at drawing, no matter how good you are at drawing, your representations are never going to capture everything, right?
mm,
So you have these like, I almost call them like, I want to think of them as like shards, these powerful shards that are finite, yes, but they're
mm,
also so dense and they're so rich, and you encounter them, and you hope that people in the encounter like get a sense of what you saw when you were doing the research and
mm.
feel a bit of what you felt, and have, and I think that's how you're giving back, and that's not a small thing to me.
And I think, yeah, this how to reciprocate is an ongoing thing too.
Of
I
course.
felt like a lot of the connection that I made is just at a very beginning stage, when I started doing the fellowship. For example, with the Kotaku, it was the first time that I kind of sent email to local Runanga to ask for, is it appropriate to go there? Is it appropriate to
Yeah.
have the birds ending up as part of a visual art. Um, and basically I just asked for permission. But even things like that, I didn't get teach at art university. Like I didn't get
No.
teach about that, and it's so I probably spent like, a very long time sitting in front of my email before I click send. Like, because you never know what your email will trigger, especially like my position, like, and they're dealing with, more important issues, like they're going to land courts, and
Mm.
and here I am asking for permission to film birds, which I guess is important too, but there's such a different ways to it. And the same goes with working with limestone and filming in Central Otago. Um, is that yeah, I had to learn how to um being very sensitive to histories in place. So with the limestone, again, asking for permission, um, um, specifically from Moiraki, Runanga, which is kind of close to where the quarry is, and also double check with staff at the quarry, like doing history of the researching history of the quarry, um, conversing with staff whether it's, is the quarry site on any kind of historic living area. Unfortunately not. Um, oh, fortunately not. um, and then again with filming, is the video showing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, filming these rocks, I had to yeah, a lot of research like that. I mean, Ngāi Tahu has Ngāi Tahu have this like rich online resource that they are so generous to share. Like you can go onto their Runanga website, and there's like so many different sections, and one of them being this history of the settlements, which is presented in like I think 7 parts YouTube seminar series.
Very cool.
I mean, that's like if you want to go there, you can. And I mean, like this, they are so generous in sharing. And yeah, a lot of research on the history of place names and
Yeah.
traveling routes. And what I did with these before I went out and filming is that I emailed them this map, and I highlight specifically which part of the route that I want to stop and do this filming with a drone. So it's not just like I just walk anywhere and start like turn on a drone and fly.
Of
It's
course.
like so everything that you see in the final video is exactly where I highlight on the map, which is then sent to the Runanga, specifically Otago Runanga, and it's gone through one of their committee meetings. And that in itself is a long process of waiting and hearing. And, there's always a chance of them saying no, and then I cannot doing anything. And
Can I stop you there for a moment? And just say that like I think one thing that's really, really important that's emerging from this conversation that in a way, I didn't expect for us to talk about, but then I think that's just like a lack of foresight. But what you said earlier, I think is extremely important, which is that what you're talking about is like how you demonstrate care, respect, responsibility, as an artist who's working with, yeah, potentially sensitive materials and places and histories. And you're right, it doesn't often get addressed. It doesn't often get talked about. You're not going to learn about it at Elam. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. Maybe in 2023. But no, it's not something that we talk about enough. So I really appreciate like first of all how much work you actually put in at the time, but also just you telling us about it now.
Yeah, like all
Because
the yeah.
I think that it comes through in the work. Like when I think about your work, I think that this level of care and diligence and respect is like strong. It comes through, you know.
Mm. And I mean, thanks to the fellowship for that, because some of this like ethical process, relationship building, connection making can't just happen in 3 months, you know? That's like,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and as I say, it's something that only beginning. So hopefully there'll be future opportunities where I can continue on relationship with yeah, with local EV, particularly in the South Island. Yeah, we don't talk about these things enough, and also there's no guidance or protocols or like obvious, you know, to especially like I found it so hard to be going to them from like a fine arts
Yeah, for sure. I can I
or
can only imagine.
creative angle too, because but also more complicated because I'm not Pakeha. Um,
Mm, I feel
so
this. Yeah, I
yeah,
feel
like
this also.
what is my position? Like how is my position gonna trigger anything's
Yeah.
um
Um, I
yeah.
should say that we have hit like your kind of initial kind of time limit. And I mean, we covered a lot of what I hoped we would cover. At the same time, like I think, especially with you and as an artist, like there's so much we could dive into. It's so rich. Like every little aspect of your work, I think we could like spend this much time talking about. Um, is there anything else you would like to say about like kind of your work and the process for these shows in particular? Because otherwise, I did want to ask you a little bit, just a little bit about
Mhm.
your life in general as an artist.
Oh yeah.
So
Um
yeah.
yeah, maybe one thing I would say before I go to that question
Mm,
is does recent connection to or into my use of language here, or how I started to approach language in connection to sound work that I was making. So what you're
mm,
seeing here, let me pause. What you're seeing here are Thai vowels.
mhm.
And we have about 32 vowels. And
Amazing.
these are what I could remember at the time of making this work.
Mhm.
Like off the top of my head, like I was surprised that I couldn't remember all 32 vowels, and that to me speak about not only memory but also like a sense of loss, things being weathered away,
Mm.
um and again in relation to stone, um
Yes.
but also in relation to the land, because for example, as you can see in the background here is this huge vast land, and your voice or the sound that you project out um echoes very differently, right?
Mhm.
So I thought about the scales of as well of how space interacting with sound, like from you, some
Yes.
from your body. So this
Mhm.
become this connection and relationship to place and space and land itself. And so yeah, my use of language here is nothing linguistic. Well, yes, there is, but but you know,
I know what you
the
mean. And not in
yeah,
such an abstract way. Yeah.
yeah, it's not about like producing text for the verb or
It's about the embodiment, right?
Mhm.
And the kind of concrete performance of language in in a real space, physical space
Yeah.
with like, yeah, physical conditions and constraints.
Yes, so yeah, maybe that's like the final thing that I want to touch on because I'm excited by it. This relationship of sound and how you pronounce it or you're projecting it outward from this internal like your body. And
Yes.
so and that's something that I'm gonna continue. Um so I'm doing a residency later on in the end of the year, and what I propose is that I'll do like I produce a series of voice recordings with different individuals and groups and like respond to those voice, not necessarily what they say, like not exactly about the content, but like how they say things or yeah. Well, we'll see. It's yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because I did want to get a sense of like where you might go next. So that's really cool. Yeah. Yeah. I'm keen to see what happens. Um, but yeah, I mean, we have
But
maybe like a small amount of time left. And so maybe we could just do this kind of like more expansive, like, what is life like for you as someone who is, really relative, like really successful, and fairly established now. Um, how does it feel? What's it like?
old, um, fairly established. Mm,
I mean, does it ever feel like that?
or
It maybe
early.
doesn't. Yeah.
Um, it's maybe it's and maybe this goes back to when I say that I don't go into studio thinking about success because and then how I always approach different
Yeah.
projects, different galleries with a sense of play and learning.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of where I stand in terms of like life, career of an artist, I don't know. I mean, it can all end tomorrow if I have an accident, for example, and I cannot use my hands any longer, like
Mm.
um
So for you, there's this kind of like sense again, right? Fragility, again, finitude, right? These things also kind of play on your mind as a person who's alive and with a body and
mm,
yeah.
yeah, uh, I would say I am quite present. So I do have short-term goals, but I'm never one of those who like, oh, by the time I'm 30, I'm gonna go live in Europe or like finish a
Yeah.
grad school from like in America or whatever, like none of that.
Yeah.
Um, or even how I end up doing what I do, like, when I finished my MFA, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm gonna have to find like graphic design job somewhere or um but again, opportunities and things and like the momentum continue as I also continue to play. Um,
Yeah.
and sometimes I find it difficult to talk about like what actually my work is about, because it changed so much in
Of
form.
course.
Um,
And it gets
so
so close that you don't even necessarily know yourself, right? Like,
yeah, but I mean, life and as an artist, it's only this year, not counting the fellowship because that's a residency. But it's only this year that without support from any kind of residency or funding, after 10 years, I can only beginning to do this full time or like not having to rely on two, three part-time jobs. Um, and my circumstance is maybe a little trickier too, because like when I'm in New Zealand, like I don't have a family home. So the foundation itself is already precarious, and then you're doing this precarious career. So there's a lot of instability and unpredictability.
Yeah.
But so yeah.
It's a
But
yeah,
but
it's a
yeah.
tough life.
I mean, in a way, it's not like, compared to many other people, but I chose to go with it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and the like some, and again, like going back to play, um, keeping on like playing in galleries and in space, that's also again not always result in sellable works.
Yes. Mhm.
Especially when you don't, yeah, when you don't think about success, whether in terms of career achievement or like finance, like money, how do you gonna feed yourself? Um, that's also, yeah, maybe I'm not the best person to talk about this because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I kind
I
of
mean, I
just,
think I think I totally understand. Like you, from a certain point of view, success and failure don't even really make that much sense as concepts. Like I remember saying to you in preparation for this, I was like, oh, should we have a section where it's like you talk about failures? And it's just like it doesn't really fit in, like what you were saying earlier. It's just about iteration. You just keep and
yeah,
it's about moving, and continuing to move and continuing to grow and continuing to learn. And that's a very different life from
yeah,
like you said, someone who has like these very specific kind of like almost like hierarchical set of goals, and
yeah,
where the
yeah,
success, that kind of success is like outside of you, right? Whereas I think what you're trying to communicate is that there's another kind of success that is just about play and growth and change and like learning,
yeah,
that is
being
its own
yourself.
reward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and just enjoy. I enjoy sharing too. Um,
Yeah.
so I think yeah, learning and sharing go hands in hand, and
I think that's very clear from your work and process as well, that like you are you're kind of leaning out into the community a lot of the time. You're leaning out of yourself into an existing ecosystem or network or set of histories. It's not like a hermetic, like I'm just in my cave in
mm,
my
mm,
head, you know.
mm,
It's very about connection and interconnection.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's a, like you said earlier as well, when you're talking about the Hocken work, like that's a form of, that's always going to be a form of reciprocation, because that's what that's what it means to be in an ecosystem, in a network. You're always
yeah,
giving and taking, and yeah, there's always exchange.
yeah. I mean, all of these outcomes come from conversations with other people in relationship with other people and histories that sometimes I'm not even part of, that fate all these ideas and creative process. Um, I would say that with the Hocken as well, we produce like a publication that include a lot of practitioners who like based in Dunedin, like Moiwai, Marsh, Madison Kelly, uh, Maya Morrison Middleton, as well as some people who's based overseas and have connections to Thailand or Southeast Asia. And the book itself sort of, it's not talking about what I present in at the Hocken at all. It's rather just like casual conversations that I record and then transcribed and put together in a book. Um,
Cool.
so yeah, I think the book, what it's saying is that I'm informed by, but also highly interested in relations and conversational settings and how that, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's
yeah.
also what this is about, you know, and that's also what this conversation that we're having is about.
Oh my God,
Um,
I have a low battery. What the hell?
yeah, you have very low battery.
I don't know what
Um,
my laptop is heating up, but okay.
might be the video plus the Zoom.
Oh yeah, I'll just stop sharing.
Will it live? Is there time for us to wrap up, or is that like, I mean, we can wrap up now, you know, like in many ways, there's so much more for us to say, so much more for you to say, I'm sure. But that was really rich. There was a really, yeah, there was an amazing conversation. And like, I knew a lot of these things about your work and about your practice, but I think it was so cool to hear more about it.
Mhm.
I think I'm gonna go away with a lot of it as well because a lot of it does appeal to me and how I work as well. So I'm sure we'll have another conversation about this,
Yeah,
whether it's recorded or not.
yeah,
Um, but I hope you had a nice time. I hope that like felt like a good space for you to share and talk about unpack some of the stuff in.
yeah. No, it's yeah. Thank you so much for the conversation. Um, again, this experience would feed into my process because it's never ending. Um, and it's good to hear, yes, someone who's like has a different, well, different discipline, um, to understand, or I mean, it's always good to hear things from audience, or yeah, because that's what who I make work for, like other people. Um, and yeah, I think we should wrap up because I don't want to the laptop
Yeah.
die and then I disappear, and then this recording didn't happen because it'll be like what? But
No, it will work. It'll be fine. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day and we'll follow
great.
up again soon. Okay, Sorawit.
All right. You take
Take
care too.
care.
See you in back home soon. All right.
Yes, can't wait.
Okay.